Okay, let me make something clear. The original and commonly used version of MCI 83, the theory that the missing children's incident where the original 5 kids die is before 1983 or in 1983, was basically an unviable jank deck before the Help Wanted 2 booster set made it more moderately viable for tournament play. Totally see how you can read this as Death Order. There is a huge caveat with our narrator for this scenario. What I mean by that is, according to the achievements, these things, these doll plushes, are called memories, and Glitchtrap's hand is what gives us these memories. And there's also unused dialogue in the game that heavily implies these are Glitchtrap's memories even further, even though the base game already kind of goes across that. And obviously for them to be memories, there has to be someone to remember them. And then you have to remember the fact that the specific order unlocks the bonding mask, which if it's about Death Order is a complete non sequitur. I'm not going to pretend I know what this is supposed to mean right now. But given that Steel has given us information that doesn't make sense until we get new information down the road, there is always the chance that whatever we're looking at here is just something that won't make sense for now, but will later. It's not to say at all that there's no way to read this or this is an unlikely way of reading it. I'm just saying we have to consider a huge asterisk with this whole discussion. This is one of those topics that can completely change with the next game or new DLC for any given project. That said, what if it was? Let's say it's really trying to say, yes, the MCI kids die before Charlie. What theories could we make around that? Now, that's not to say I completely believe it is, I just want to entertain it for at least one video, because sometimes just entertaining an idea can get interesting results. Okay, one thing we have to do real quick. Okay, now that we've killed that, we have to continue a little bit. If we're not going to borrow the Death Order from Silver Eyes, with Charlie dying before the MCI, there's not much of a reason to take other things from the Silver Eyes continuity or its rule. It's Charlie and MCI's death is a bit of a non-factor. Speaking of the year 1983, we might as well cut off this little welt in this name. If we take away the Silver Eyes continuity having Charlie dying in 1983, we have no reason for the titular MCI 83, at least if the gravestones are proof for anything. You can easily make theories where the MCI happens before Charlie's death, and Charlie's death can just be later on in the timeline. Theoretically, the MCI could happen at any point from 1983 to 1987. They're already in the suits in 1987 in FNaF 2, so they have to die sometime before that. But likewise, we know they die at a Freddy's Fazbear's Pizza, and that doesn't exist until 1983 according to the founding date on the Faz tokens. So the MCI can happen at any point between 1983 and 1987, and likewise, Charlie's death can happen at any time with an asterisk after they die. Once again, it has to be before FNaF 2 because she's clearly there. Now, I want to make it clear why people want it to be in 1983. A lot of people want the missing children to be what the bite victim saw, which, while not technically impossible, is a major assumption we have very little proof for. The inherent problem that MCI 83 has always had was how FNaF 2 talked about the timeline. And keep in mind, FNaF 2's timeline, with the exception of Phone Guy being Purple Guy, was pretty much greenlit by Scott when it came to how game theory interpreted it all. So as far as we know, the loose order events of Fredbear's Family Diner, Unseen Freddy's, and then Freddy's 2 happen is the loosely correct timeline. And this is, borderline stated in game. Phone Guy talks about Freddy's 0 like it was a more recent event than Fredbear's, and he talks about how hard it is to contact the original owners of Fredbear's. Which, by the very nature that Phone Guy says it's so hard to track anyone down from Fredbear's, and yet he speaks with a good amount of familiarity with Freddy's to the point where it sounds like he worked there, or at least was very familiar with its location and layout, implies that he either came from there or it was recent enough for him to be familiar with it, rather than him barely remembering the name of Fredbear's and saying it's so hard to track anyone down. If Freddy's was older than Fredbear's, this is borderline a plot hole or a very misleading statement. So for the MCI to be before the bite victim's death specifically implies Freddy's closes before Fredbear's, which in FNaF 2 is treated as something older or more derelict, something that's hard to track down rather than something that's just been kind of left behind. Not to mention Scott gave us the out of what scene in Shadows is easily misunderstood in the mind of a child, which, considering the whole concept of a Springlock suit, it could just be that he thinks they are eating people, when in reality it's just employees wearing costumes. And then you just have William as the plush as established in Sister Location, which I personally interpret at this point in the timeline more as a sort of gaslighting not to f with the stuff and become a delinquent like Mike. Basically like the scared straight kind of concept of don't mess with anything, don't annoy the yellow bear man, he'll eat you, you little greased pumpkin. That's personally one of the ways I look at it, but you don't need to. Point is, the main reason it would even be in 1983 is to give the bite victim a motive to be scared, and he doesn't actually need one. There are other explanations without him seeing something traumatic. But if we strip MCI 83 of its titular 83, and we just let the bite victim die first, Fruity Maze, Security Puppet, and Midnight Motorist can all be back to back in one night. June 26th, 1985, or some year around that. William kills the main 5 kids, starting with Susie, who's led back to the safe room with the promise of her dog being back there. The others also die. Cassidy may or may not be spring-locked. He's about to drive off, but as he's pulling out of the driveway, he sees one final opportunity for the night. Kind of piggybacking off of one of my previous theories where Fredbear's closes after the bite, and then it becomes Junior's, and as stated in FNaF 2, Fredbear's has original owners that are different from the owners of Freddy's. So if William owned the original Fredbear's and worked with Henry, then they would not be owning the company with Freddy's moving forward. However, the Insanity ending states that Henry made the classic animatronics. These are new owners who bought them out after Fredbear's closes. So even if we don't have the puppet dying first, we can have William desecrating Henry's new creations for this new company by killing kids in the restaurant. This could be Will stuff or puppet stuff, doesn't really matter, we'll get into that in a bit. But point being, that could be his initial attack on Henry. That's a way to work a wound first inflicted on me without it being Charlie's death. Charlie's death is also included in that wound. If we have the MCI and Charlie's death on the same night, then we could have the security puppet wander its way out to Charlie, she possesses the suit. From there, you can have puppet stuff where in that same night where she has just come to life, she gives them life. Or if you believe Will stuffed, we can fix one of the problems I had with Will stuff, which was the lengths of efforts you would need to go to stuff these kids would be more incriminating than just leaving them in the back room and letting there be plausible deniability that someone else just killed them. But if he was intentionally trying to mess with Henry and his creations, theoretically, stuffing them could be a way to get back at him. Now his suits are covered with blood and gore. But likewise, the narrative I've been building with the puppet of a hasty decision trying to save all the kids by stuffing them, not really fully understanding the implications and regretting it later, that could add to the hasty, frantic nature that I've been proposing with puppet stuff. And this night, the bite victim could be long dead for all we care. We could have Michael run away and go through all his Michael Motorist shenanigans. I mean, you could theoretically still have bite victim run away and see the kids die and whatever in 1983, but I feel like Junior's and the Lump don't have good explanations under this interpretation right now. Because, like, Junior's being Fredbear's lines up with its location. And also, for all the people who really want FNaF 6's minigames to have, like, a theme or overarching narrative, it has one now if they all die on the same night. Susie dies, Charlie dies, William drives home, Michael runs off, and in this one night, pretty much the entire story is set in motion. That's why I've nicknamed this theory Omni-MCI. Now I wrote it with an omega in the thumbnail, but don't worry about it. Granted, there is a flaw with this overall theory, which is the normal timeline where Charlie dies first and then sometime later William kills the MCI kids and everything happens as a response to that, where it's like, oh, I learned a kid could possess a suit here, and then I tried to execute it and continue this plan and test it in the MCI, and then that builds up to FNaF 2, and then that builds up to Sister Location and all those kinds of theories. You don't really get that arc as strongly here. That narrative is there a little bit, but is nowhere near as strong. It's also a little easier to accept that William would just start with killing one kid and then build up to 5, rather than starting with 5 and then just killing one extra opportunistically. But hey, if you were willing to brush aside that kind of stuff for the original versions of MCI 83, I feel like Omni-MCI could totally run with it. Now, I'm not the first person to suggest that Charlie's death could be on the same night as the MCI, but I haven't really ever seen it all explained this way. And it didn't really have a name, hence Omni-MCI. I think it's completely fitting. It's a version of the MCI that includes Charlie. It's everything happening on one night. Omni, all, MCI. It also lends itself pretty easily to naming variants, like Bite Victim First Omni-MCI. You can make it Omni-MCI 83 or Omni-MCI 85. You can swap in and out who you think the runaway is, Midnight Motorist. It is a theory that the more you genuinely think about and consider, the more flexible it becomes. And while I'm not sold on it myself, I think it's a really funky perspective to look at that I think is worth talking about, which is one of my kind of mission statements with this channel at this point. There's plenty of ways you can theorize and make the story we think of still work. And with all that said,